So before we get into this analysis, I quickly wanted to give some of the spots that I talk about actual names, and I wanted to explain a concept about this map that's going to be very relevant in regards to the strategy of the Dallas Fuel when they were defending. So just to give them some names, this area right here, I'll just call that pillars because there are pillars. This is the high ground behind the pillars. This is the high ground next to the mega. This area back here is the stairs area, and then this is the main choke with the high ground on top of it. Okay, so these are the 5 main spots. Now, you can take Anubis and divide it into 3 kind of zones. So we have this top zone here. We have this zone in the bottom, okay? And then we have this zone in the center. Now, the reason that I'm showcasing this is because it becomes very, very, very relevant to the strategy. So the pink zones are very, very narrow and tight. There are a lot of rooms, a lot of buildings, and traversing through those areas can be very difficult. But the blue area is in the center, which means it's very exposed, but it also has a lot of space. And that's going to become very, very relevant later regarding the strategy of the Dallas, because they try to push the Dynasty as they start pushing into those pink areas while taking control of the blue area. But because of a mistake that they make, they will actually not really succeed in that strategy. But we'll go over that now.
I suppose it is just an ineffective one at that. Same style of defense, and this worries me a bit because it hasn't changed when it comes to their positioning or their team composition, and Seoul was effective against this.
Yeah, I mean, when you go back to this sort of high ground defense, it's kind of kicking it old school a little bit. I feel like teams like Seoul and like a lot of other teams a long time ago have figured out how to dive this properly.
All right, they're diving now. They're waiting to get healed up, and now everybody's coming in.
Here we go. Beck gets a kill on Defleta with a mine, actually. Interestingly enough, gets chased off the high ground, though. Couple shots on Zunba as he falls, but his team falling around him as it happens. Toby in the trap, but Jaehong is there to save his mercy with a shot to the dome. On effect, that's going to be a very quick point A.
And when we saw Dallas Fuel, their strategy the first time was to plop down the healing station from the Soldier 76 and try and fight on that on the initial dive. This time around, though, they send Zunba in to disrupt and punch people back from that high ground, so they're not getting as much healing, and they just move. It's just an ineffective one at that. Same style of defense.
Usually Fuel's Widowmaker would want to set up on the high ground near the point. However, he isn't doing that because he knows that Fleta is a good Widowmaker player, and standing on that high ground would put him into the line of sight of the bridge atop the main choke. Since they are running an Orisa anyways, it makes sense for him to position himself further up. This gives him the protection of Orisa's shield, but it also makes him a lot more diveable. Fuel are running only one support, the idea being that if they abuse Orisa's shield, they'll be able to hold this without taking too much damage in the first place. The Mercy is mainly in this team to heal up a bit of poke damage, resurrect any picks the Dynasty may get in order to stop them from getting momentum and the Fuel losing their setup, and most importantly to damage boost the Widowmaker and Junkrat, so that the former has an easier time zoning and the latter has an easier time blowing rooms up. Ideally, Fuel's Mercy wants to damage boost the right target based on the situation. For example, if the Soul would walk into the right room, he should damage boost the Junkrat. If they are out in the open, the Widowmaker. Fuel's Diva positions himself on the bridge, mainly to scout ahead. If Fuel's Widowmaker would stand up there and scout, the chances of him getting picked off by a potential Widowmaker are too high. Diva, on the other hand, is tanky enough to spot who is running out of spawn and get back alive without wasting a Mercy res. If Diva won't be able to spot a Widowmaker coming out of the Dynasty's spawn, Fuel's Widowmaker should fall back and take the position on the high ground next to the point. This makes him a lot less diveable and gives him slightly better sightlines, and he won't need the Orisa shield if he's uncontested.
So this worries me a bit because it hasn't changed when it comes to their positioning or their team composition.
I want to quickly mention how the Dynasty are splitting themselves up here. They do not know what the Fuel are running, so at the start they need to play it safe and scout. They need to know if someone is standing on the high ground next to the point, both the right high ground towards the defender's spawn and the left high ground next to the large health pack. The problem, however, is that you can't scout both of them conveniently from one side of the main choke, meaning that you would have to walk in pretty deep in order to collect information. In order to deal with this, they split up. This allows the Winston, for example, to scout one side of the point, and someone like Zenyatta to scout the other one. Another reason for this could be that they anticipated the Widowmaker pick. With Widowmaker, the smaller the flick, the easier it is to land usually, so by splitting up, they could divert Widowmaker's attention away from the Zenyatta. Her field of view is drastically limited while scoping in, so if the Dynasty are spreading out too much, it's not possible for her to remain scoped and be aware of where everyone is.
And Seoul was effective against this.
Yeah, I mean, when you go back to this sort of high ground defense, it's kind of kicking it old school a little bit. I feel like teams like Seoul, like
now that Fuel's Widowmaker knows the Dynasty are running a dive comp for sure, he no longer needs to place his mine at the choke in order to scout, but he instead places it in the middle of his team to prepare for an incoming dive. It's a pretty big mistake of him to not fall back to the high ground behind him. By now, he should be pretty confident that the Dynasty aren't running a Widowmaker. His diva just scouted that, and it's unlikely that the Dynasty would just fake a hero pick coming out of spawn. Falling back would make him much less vulnerable to a potential dive, and taking the high ground would also provide him with better sightlines and a better angle to get a pick on Dynasty's Mercy and Zenyatta.
a lot of other teams a long time ago have figured out how to dive this properly.
All right, they're diving now.
Now that the Dynasty have all the information that they needed, they decide to go for a full-on engage. Seeing that Fuel's Widowmaker was completely out of position right next to the pillars, and that they can't cross right into the Mega Room or left onto the high ground without getting mauled by damage-boosted Junkrat spam, they take their opportunity and dive the Fuel. In this situation, the advantage is definitely with the Dynasty. We can also see how Fuel's Widowmaker's trap was triggered and hit most of the Dynasty, so that's a plus. Overall, however, the Dynasty have the upper hand. One of the biggest counters to characters like Tracer and Genji is healing. As Genji or Tracer, you always want to focus the easiest and fastest entry frag you can find, and usually those entry frags are healers. The reason for that is that most healers can't heal themselves, which means that damage that's being dealt to them is semi-permanent and won't get healed back up immediately. Since the Fuel only have one real support, Fuel's Mercy relies on either flying to his Widowmaker, who just disengaged, or crouch strafing in his soldier's biotic field. Once those options run out, however, the Dynasty can simply slowly burn the Fuel down while they lack the healing per second to do anything about it. The Fuel needed to herd the Dynasty into narrow areas, but their Widowmaker's positioning gave the Dynasty an opener to dive in.
Waiting to get healed up, and now everybody's coming in.
At least Fuel Widowmaker's mine pays off and helps deal high amounts of damage to the Dynasty. This was a mistake by Dynasty's Zenyatta. I can understand why he would want to put his Harmony Orb on the Mercy, as she is a pretty high value target that needs to be protected. However, the biggest threat to her is Fuel's Widowmaker, who doesn't really care whether or not his target has a Harmony Orb on him, considering it's going to be a one-shot either way. Dynasty's Zenyatta should have put his Harmony Orb on the Genji or the Tracer, although preferably the Genji, considering that Tracer A has a much lower health pool and is therefore more prone to getting one shot, at which point the Harmony Orb wouldn't help much anymore, and B has much less verticality, which means that it'll take her longer to actually get into the fight compared to Genji, who can just dash right in, and C, she has Recall, which is a much stronger defensive cooldown than Genji's Deflect. For the aforementioned reasons, I think Dynasty's Zenyatta should have prioritized putting his Harmony Orb on Genji, because losing him to damage over time is really bad and could have been prevented easily. One of the problems for the Fuel here is that their Widowmaker has to waste a bunch of time grapple hooking her way onto this high ground, which is time she could have used potentially demeching Dynasty's Diva or even taking down their Mercy as well. Fuel's composition relied entirely on killing the Dynasty before they killed them, so it's a pure damage race between both teams. Not dealing any damage because you're too busy getting dove and having to reposition makes it obvious why the Dynasty snowballed this advantage. What the Dynasty did play strategically superior, and their only mistake that I could spot was Zenyatta's misplaced Harmony Orb, the Fuel had a pretty solid strategy that could have worked if they correctly positioned the Widowmaker and potentially played a double support setup. Running a Zenyatta instead of Soldier could provide them with some extra healing, although it would make them more vulnerable to dive. But if a Zenyatta could position himself further back outside of the Dynasty's effective dive range, potentially on the high ground next to the Mega Health Pack room above the point, they could have seen better results. A Zenyatta on said high ground would have great vision of the pillars that the Dynasty eventually dove, and the big health pack room to the right of the pillars, which the Fuel wanted to zone the Dynasty into anyways, so he could spam his arguably slightly overpowered right clicks into there next to the Junkrat spam from Taimu, while making him nigh impossible to dive and providing additional healing for the Fuel to outlast the damage coming from the Dynasty. The Dynasty don't have any real burst damage, except for Ryo Jae-hong's Zenyatta, who can fire right clicks. But that won't really happen, considering that the Fuel have an Orisa shield stopping Dynasty's Zenyatta from doing anything. This leaves the Dynasty with Winston, Tracer, Genji, and D.Va, who all deal damage that is very healable usually, so having more healing could definitely benefit them. The Soldier biotic field is nice of course, and the extra damage can help, but I feel having a decentralized support somewhere else on the map could have turned out better for them.
Here we go, Beck gets a kill onto Fleta with a mine actually. Interestingly enough, gets chased off.
The Dynasty initially dived the pillars, as the entirety of the Fuel were positioning themselves right there all clumped up. Dynasty's Winston and Genji benefit a lot from stacked up enemies, as their Tesla Cannon and Swift Strike scale 1-to-1 with AoE, and thus help them drown an ult charge and make it even harder for Fuel's solo healing Mercy to heal away all that damage. Since the Fuel were so stacked up, the Dynasty only needed to dive in once to get into position. This is problematic, because by the time Fuel's Widowmaker got into a better position, Dynasty's Winston has his leap again, giving him the option to chase after Fuel's Widowmaker. This immediately forces him off of that high ground without really being able to do anything, and more importantly, puts Fuel's Mercy into a very bad position. Mercy always needs at least 2 teammates that are a certain distance apart that she can Guardian Angel to. If everyone is clumped up, then Mercy has no way to escape, which is incredibly bad against a dive composition. Putting Fuel's Widowmaker on that high ground would have allowed his Mercy to fly between teammates and escape Dynasty's assassins, but now that Fuel's Widowmaker is forced off the high ground mere seconds after reaching it, Fuel's Mercy has absolutely no way to escape from the Dynasty, dying without even rezzing anyone.
Off the high ground though, couple shots on Zunba as he falls, but his team falling around him as it happens. Toby in the trap, but Jae-hong is there to save his Mercy with a shot to the dome on effect.
So overall, the Fuel didn't use the information that their D.Va could have scouted at the start correctly. Their strategy was for effect on Widowmaker to herd the Dynasty into small narrow areas like the room to the right of the pillars or the stairs leading to the left high ground with the mega room. Once the Dynasty are in that area, a damage boost Junkrat could wreak havoc and clean the Dynasty up. If the Dynasty wouldn't go into those areas, a damage boosted Widowmaker could clean them up, especially their immobile and unprotected supports, considering they are running a full force dive comp. The fatal flaw, however, was that they ran a single support, which made them incredibly easy to kill despite the Dynasty's lack of true burst damage like a Widowmaker or Junkrat for example. And the fact that Effect on Widowmaker positioned himself in the middle of his team despite knowing the Dynasty had no Widowmaker to contest him, were he to stand on the high ground behind the pillars. Standing there would have allowed his Mercy to move around easier while making him harder to kill by the Dynasty and giving him more time and space to pick off the Dynasty's backline. They really have to keep information like this in mind. They need to assess their comp's main weaknesses and play around them. If the Dynasty had a Widowmaker, then playing the way they did was definitely understandable. But with the information available to them, they needed to react faster and adjust their positioning sooner, while also considering running a duo support setup for the next time they get into a situation like this.
That's going to be a very quick point A.
And when we saw Dallas Fuel, their strategy the first time was to plop down the healing station from the Soldier 76 and try and fight on that on the initial dive. This time around, though, they send Zunba in to disrupt and punch people back from that high ground, so they're not getting as much healing, and they just...
Seeing that their strategy didn't work out, the Dallas Fuel started making some swaps. First, they put Effect on Tracer instead of Widowmaker. This is not the best swap. On one hand, losing the ult charge he has gained on Widowmaker isn't really that big of a deal, so swapping to another character in of itself is reasonable. But the Dynasty completely rolled over the first point. This means that they now have a lot of momentum and a huge ultimate advantage. In their initial push, the Dynasty have a huge advantage over the Dallas Fuel based on that alone, which leaves the Fuel with only one option: winning the team fight before it even starts. If the Dynasty get point presence, then they will snowball this entire fight and win, and the Fuel can't really take them on directly because of their disadvantage, which means their only option is to get a pick somehow, which would give them the time to set up completely and farm up some ultimates to prevent the Dynasty from taking the point. Right now, the only hope they have of getting such a pick would be Fuel Junkrat with his Riptire, or their Zenyatta with a right click. If Effect would have stayed on Widowmaker, then they would have one additional option of getting a pick. Tracer, on the other hand, needs to farm up her Pulse Bomb in order to get one, unless he would try to dive Dynasty's Zenyatta, which is incredibly risky and difficult to execute. Other than that, the swap from Soldier to a second healer in the form of Zenyatta makes complete and total sense. On one hand, to counter Dynasty's Dragon Blade, on the other, to get picks with right click. XQC going from Orisa to Winston also makes sense. It's a comfort pick and helps with both Dynasty's Genji and Mercy. Whether the Fuel defend this point mainly depends on them getting that initial pick, something that Fuel's Junkrat Taimu is already trying to do, standing on top of the main choke being damage boosted.
Move straight on through. Take a look at Miro's perspective right here. Valkyrie's already up. So the poke that was done early gave Toby a ton of ult charge. That's why they fell back and waited for all the heals to come through before diving.
Miro already disrupting Dallas Fuel in their defensive setup there on the high ground. Gonna go in now. Munchkin very low on the outside, has to recall. He's in a safe spot though.
All right, Taimu with a Riptire, waiting for it, does get Munchkin, but Toby's coming in with the Resurrect. Mickey wants to zone them off the point. He's trying to get as much time as he can.
Yep, that's right. Just trying to buy as much
There's
as possible.
the res.
Yeah, Munchkin brought up by Toby at the last second. Comes back in. He's getting a lot of healing in with this Valk, but now they need to get some time.
Wow, Munchkin actually managed to blow up Taimu with the Pulse Bomb, and this is an easy roll here for Seoul Dynasty.
Oh, wow. This may be it, actually. Dallas has one more chance to get onto the point and try to push this back, but XQC going down fast. Nice shot by...
Move straight on through. Take a look at Miro's perspective right here. Valkyrie's already up. So the poke that was done early gave Toby a ton of ult charge. That's why they fell back.
Dynasty's Winston spotted Fuel's Junkrat disengaging a bit earlier, but he didn't see him dropping down, and when looking at the point, the only player he could spot was Fuel's Mercy. He connected the dots and came to the conclusion that the Fuel are probably lurking on them in order to prevent a snowball. The Dallas Fuel assumed that the Dynasty wanted to snowball this point as quickly as possible and just rush in, which is why they set up above the main choke, hoping to drop down and cut the Dynasty in half as they rush onto the point. The Dynasty aren't fooled that easily, however, as their Winston engages the high ground in front of the choke to clear that out first before fully committing onto the point. It's really great to see how both teams always try to collect as much information as possible before engaging.
And waited for all the heals to come through before diving.
Miro already disrupting Dallas Fuel in their defensive setup there on the high ground.
Now that they have that information, they decide to actually go for an engage. They probably hesitated a bit too long, but they eventually decide to push onto the point. Dynasty's ult economy looks outstanding, and especially since they have a Mercy Valkyrie while the Fuel's Mercy is still at around 50%, it becomes even more dire. If Fuel's Junkrat could use his Riptire to take out Dynasty's Mercy, then they would have a good shot at holding the point. If not, then it's just a matter of time until the Dynasty capture the point.
Go in now. Munchkin very low on the outside, has to recall. He's in a safe spot though.
All right, Taimu with...
Dynasty's Tracer was fully aware of this win condition, and so was their Mercy as well. Dynasty's Mercy is playing very passively, still standing at the choke while the rest of her team is standing on the point. The reason she is doing that is because it's much better to let her teammates potentially die on the point and then just follow that up with the Valkyrie than to stand on the point trying to keep the players alive, only for her to get picked, her teammates to die, and her not being able to res. So Dynasty's Tracer pushes in aggressively, in hopes of killing the Junkrat and his tire in time. Some players were wondering why he would run into an ulting Junkrat, that it would be suicide, but this is the main reason. It was his win condition. If he wouldn't have tried it, then there was a chance his Mercy would die, and he wanted to avoid that.
The rip tire.
This was a huge mistake by Fuel's Junkrat Taimu. He was panicking and made a very fatal mistake that cost his team the point. His win condition was to take down Mercy. If Mercy doesn't die here, the point is pretty much lost, as the Dynasty can prolong Fuel's respawns thanks to their point presence, while making a retake unfeasible considering Fuel's current ult economy, especially that of Mercies and Tracers. Junkrat's Riptire can continue to be controlled even after death, so what Taimu should have done here is ignore Dynasty's Tracer and chase after the enemy Mercy to take her down. If he would have done that, then Dynasty's Tracer had to make a choice. Either she takes the risk and just prays that Fuel's Junkrat will fail to take down Dynasty's Mercy using Riptire while Tracer kills him, or she plays it safe and tries to destroy the Riptire that's en route to his Mercy, leaving Fuel's Junkrat alone and alive. So based on that alone, Fuel's Junkrat could have been a martyr, taking down the enemy Mercy and giving his team a chance of defending the point, or he could panic like he did here, taking down Dynasty's Tracer, which won't really make a difference, seeing that he'll get rezzed by Mercy anyways.
Waiting for it does get Munchkin, but Toby's coming in with the Resurrect. Mickey wants to zone them off the point. He's trying to get as much time as he can.
Yep, that's right. Just trying to buy as much
There's
as possible.
the res.
Yeah, Munchkin brought up by Toby at the last second. Comes back in. He's getting a lot of healing in with this Valk, but now they need to get some time.
Well, Munchkin actually managed to blow up Taimu with the Pulse Bomb, and this is an easy roll here for Seoul Dynasty.
Oh, wow. This may be it, actually.
Here we can see how that one misplay snowballed into the point for the Dynasty. Not only did Mercy res Tracer once, but she actually resed her twice. Fuel's Junkrat trading his life for Dynasty Mercies would have given them so much more time to defend. But this just showcases how very small mistakes like this can have a drastic effect on the outcome of the round.
With XQC on the Orisa and effect on the Widowmaker one more time, Seoul is changing it up. They will start to head this off right after they go in from the choke point, and they're not going to give any shots to effect in the meantime.
Seems to be the setup.
Well, they know if they kill effect that there's very low damage output on the side of Dallas.
Zinba, death from above. Firing from on high, coming down. Wow, right on the chips. Great rockets, gets hooked, but it doesn't matter. The Mercy's already out of commission.
But
or maybe it does.
Yeah, Effect takes down J-Long, and they manage to grind it out. So even though the healer goes down, a different tactic this time. They use a Lucio speed boost to get onto the point and force the dive composition to play into them on the tanks. So they just ignore the dive. They say, you can't catch us. We're going to move faster by amping it up, speed boosting our team over, and then you have to walk into our tanks where you just get hooked and die.
I mean, they had Lucio. They had Harry Hook on the Lucio in their first attack too, but they took it a little bit slower. This time going straight.
Once again, we have very interesting strategies and setups from both teams. Let's go over the Seoul Dynasty first. They are running basically the exact same setup they did on offense, which gives them one advantage in that they are already fully warmed up. But I feel like this comp doesn't really excel as much on defense. They would be much better off with the Widowmaker, and I'll explain why in a second. They are setting up for a Fuel pincer here, putting their Tracer at the pillars, Zenyatta at the high ground next to the Mega Room, and the rest of the team at the stairs. This setup, however, has once again a pretty big flaw, and that's a lack of escape options for Mercy. Technically, having Zenyatta on the high ground would give Mercy someone to Guardian Angel to, and considering that the Fuel don't even have any verticality in their comp right now, although they couldn't know that, she would be incredibly safe up there. But with the way they are positioned right now, Mercy needs to get on the point first in order to establish line of sight with the Zenyatta, after which she can then Guardian Angel up to him. But that takes a lot of time, and during that time, the Mercy is incredibly vulnerable. Other than that, they are just forcing the Fuel to engage first and get on the point in hopes of being able to squish them together from 3 different directions on the point. Their triangle formation here is definitely interesting, and generally speaking, applying pressure from multiple directions is always a great idea. A Widowmaker could really help here. They could have put Fleta on Widow, put Dynasty's Mercy player Toby right next to him, and then keep everyone else where they are. This would create a square formation, and as such apply pressure from an additional angle, while giving the potential Widowmaker opportunities to get picks before the fuel even get to the point, and Mercy a safe place to be. They needed to switch up their comp in order to deal with their main weaknesses. On the other hand, the fuel are expecting a Widowmaker, which is why they are running this triple tank setup. Can't one-shot if your targets are 600 HP meat shields. Their general strategy is to just get on the point as fast as possible and force the Seoul Dynasty out of their comfort zone. The idea is that effect on Widowmaker zones the entire open middle section from the main choke. Mickey on Diva contests a potential enemy Widowmaker on either high ground, while Orisa essentially creates a small bubble of nigh invulnerability on the point, which would force the Dynasty to drop down onto the point in order to contest and fight the fuel. Putting Taimu on Roadhog is a comfort pick and helps with getting picks thanks to the Orisa, and also knocking the Dynasty off of the high ground if necessary. The only weakness is their lack of mobility. By the time they would reach the point, they'd all get slaughtered by the Dynasty, but that's what the Lucio pick is for, allowing them to speed boost onto the point and setting up ASAP before the Dynasty can deal too much damage. Overall, the fuel are just ready for basically anything the Dynasty could throw at them, whereas the Dynasty, while set up decently, could do much more with their comp than just play full dive.
With XQC on the Orisa and effect on the Widowmaker one more time, Seoul is changing it up. They will start to head this off right after they go in from the choke point, and they're not going to give any shots to effect in the meantime.
Seems to be the setup.
Well, they know if they kill effect that there's very low damage output on the side of Dallas.
Zinba, definitely.
At this moment in time, the Seoul Dynasty were fully aware of what the fuel were up to, which is why they dove in so early. They want to let the fuel push onto the point so that Dynasty Zenyatta player Ryu Jehong could contribute to the fight without needing to reposition, and they could fully benefit from their pincer strategy. They knew that letting the fuel fully set up on the point, however, would make diving them a lot harder, so they needed to find that perfect timing of diving in early enough before the fuel built their bunker, but not so early that they'll fight a 5v6 without their Zenyatta.
Above. Firing from on.
Near the start of this analysis, I talked a bit about how these players have already built synergy for a while now, and this shows that really well. We can see how Dynasty's Winston Miro jumps in first and Zunba, their Diva player, follows in immediately afterwards. These kinds of coordinated dives is one of Dynasty's strongest skills. However, dive just doesn't do that well versus triple tank. A dive comp really relies on blowing a target up that's out of position, and their biggest weakness are teams that stack up together and just form a huge ball of HP. So while the Dynasty are very well coordinated and show up great synergy, they just aren't as prepared as the fuel here.
High coming down.
This pick on the Mercy is really huge, but keep in mind that the rest of the fuel are a lot harder to kill. Sure, they won't really have a lot of healing, but they can still abuse Orisa's barrier. Roadhog can heal himself, and Lucio is incredibly hard to kill as is, while Fuel's Widowmaker is set up all the way in the back on top of the choke. The Dynasty can't follow up on this play. They took their first steps, but then the bridge collapsed. One thing worth mentioning here is how certain team comps scale in terms of ult economy. Some team comps are really strong once they get the ball rolling in terms of ultimates, and some other teams rely more on their core kit to win team fights than their ultimates. While both teams play a comp that doesn't really rely on ultimates too much, I feel like in a fight without ultimates, the Dallas Fuel have the upper hand. The Dynasty have some really big ults like Pulse Bomb or Dragon Blade and even Transcendence, whereas the Fuel don't really have many strong ultimates. Roadhog's Whole Hog is nice, but nothing compared to a Dragon Blade. Same with Diva's Bomb. Widowmaker's Wall Hack, although it can be quite strong, don't get me wrong, but not Dragon Blade levels of strong. And Orisa's Supercharger, one of the most boring and unimpressive ultimates in the game in my opinion, basically a damage boosting Mercy and Valkyrie, but easier to kill. But Dallas' core kits are super strong. D.Va is an excellent dive character. Roadhog is known for his hook, not his whole hog. Widowmaker doesn't need her ult to get picks, and Orisa's barrier is incredibly strong in of itself. So in a first fight, the Fuel are definitely stronger, although once the Dynasty gets some ultimates, they may have to swap their comp.
Wow, right on the chips, great rockets, gets hooked, but it doesn't matter. The
Dynasty's Zenyatta getting picked off here is huge and really shows how devastating it is to leave an attacking Widowmaker uncontested. If the Dynasty put Flater on Widowmaker, Fuel's Widowmaker effect couldn't have peeked out this far to the left side to see the right side high ground the Zenyatta stood on without exposing himself to a potential Widowmaker on the high ground opposite of that. Widowmaker has all the space she could want right now and take the angles she needs to get picks, which is a big blow because on one hand, Dynasty's Mercy may struggle escaping now without him being alive, and depending on how he died, he may not even be resible since the Mercy may not be able to fly up to him unless he died right on the edge. This also takes out one of Dynasty's angles of attack, meaning that they are now having a brawl on the point without anyone on high ground, while the Fuel still have the pressure from effect on Widowmaker.
Mercy's already out of commission.
But
or maybe it does.
Yeah, Effect takes down Jaehong, and they managed to grind it out, so even though the healer goes down...
So it seems like Dynasty's Zenyatta actually died on the bridge, which is interesting. The only reason why he would stand there is because he was scared of Fuel's Widowmaker, but that wouldn't really be a great argument, considering that standing on the bridge exposes him a lot too, and also makes it much easier for the Fuel members on the point to punish him. It does, however, make him easier to res, but someone who dies out of position gets resed out of position, which limits the value. It does give the Dynasty a potential shot at retaking, but the Fuel are just set up so well right now that it would be incredibly hard despite them lacking their Mercy.
A different tactic this time. They used a Lucio speed boost to get onto the point and force the dive composition to play into them on the tanks. So they just ignore the dive. They say, you can't catch us, we're gonna...
Right there, we could see how easy it was for the Fuel to punish Dynasty supports, and how they were abusing Orisa's shield to force the Dynasty down onto the point. At this point, it's basically just cleanup for the Fuel. If the Dynasty had their supports on the high ground, then they definitely could have won this fight, especially considering that they got a pick on Mercy right off the bat, which makes this win for the Fuel even more surprising. The Dynasty did, however, waste some of Fuel's time, and more importantly, they managed to farm up a decent bit of ult charge before dying, which is interesting. Usually, the attacking team has a pretty big ult advantage when they take the point in the first push, but they are running a very tank-heavy composition, which means that even if the Dynasty lose the point, they have a lot more HP to burn down, and thus a lot more ult charge to generate.
Move faster by amping it up, speed boosting.
And this is Dynasty's big mistake. Instead of just realizing that this point is lost, that they have built up a decent amount of ult charge, and that they just need to prevent a snowball from the side of the Fuel, Dynasty's D.Va player Zunba decides to take shots at the Fuel, and he gets punished. Hard. This pick allows the Fuel to snowball, jumping on the next point in a 6v5, abusing the longer spawn times of the Dynasty thanks to their eventual point presence, and then just killing people over and over and over again. If the Dynasty would receive the Fuel in a 6v6, then they would have a pretty solid shot at actually defending the point. But if they are in a 5v6, then by the time one of them respawns, the Fuel have already used their superior numbers to get another pick, making it very, very hard to stabilize.
Straight up the middle, and Seoul wasn't ready.
So the thing is, they didn't see any defenders on the high ground, so they're like, oh, you guys are playing dive. Okay.
Goodbye, Fleta. Time on fire right now. Popping that whole hog, needs a little bit more. Munchkin finds the kill anyway. XQC on the point with that Orisa. Effect in the back, getting the shots, takes down Jaehong. The control meter is building, and they've already seized control of that point.
This just keeps on going. Effect still has that angle, a hook on the
Another
side.
hook.
Toby switching to the Sombra just to get back to that point, but it's nearly done.
Yeah, Fleta can't dislodge Effect. He loses that duel again. Transcendence for Jaehong, just trying to buy time for more of his team to respawn. Another attempt at that with the Primal Rage from Miro on that Winston. Doesn't matter though, the kill still coming in for Dallas. Taimu misses a hook, but they've chased the Winston back again.
They have, but they're still not getting this actual point.
They've nearly
They're
got
gonna
it,
try
though.
and come in with the Dragon Blade, but he gets picked off by Taimu.
That's right. Munchkin just being as annoying as he can. There's Zumba with all that health on the Diva mech.
There he's killed by a Pulse Bomb. This may actually be a hold. Can they do it?
Well, Taimu gets the kill on the Munchkin. He's got another whole hog. All right, they've got the Mei in there now for Seoul Dynasty, but he can push people back. They're so close, they've nearly got it. Fleta falls, and that will...
Our team over, and then you have to walk into our tanks where you just get hooked and die.
I mean, they had Lucio. They had Harry Hook on the Lucio in their first attack too, but they took it a little bit slower.
Yeah.
This time going straight up the middle, and Seoul just wasn't ready.
So the thing is, they didn't see any defenders on the high ground.
Another advantage of the Lucio pick, snowballing becomes a whole lot easier. If they ran a Zenyatta, then it would take them much longer to actually get on the second point. But thanks to the Lucio pick, they can get even their most immobile characters like the Roadhog and Orisa on the point. This is twice as important, considering that it's going to be much easier for the field to win a fight if they have already set up on the point, rather than wasting time hoping for another pick and slowly pushing their way onto the point Orisa barrier by Orisa barrier.
So they're like, oh, you guys
Oh,
playing
that
dive. Okay.
Goodbye, Fleta.
At this point, there really is not that much more to say. Dynasty's Genji Fleta actually made the right call by playing aggressively here, since he needed to get a pick before the field snowballed their earlier pick on Dynasty's Diva into a full setup on the point. But even that wouldn't have helped them here anymore, since Fuel's Widowmaker managed to actually pick off the Dynasty's Mercy. To be fair, the Dynasty couldn't have defended this even if the Mercy survived, because the Diva died already a few seconds before, but at least they would have a small chance. All that's left for the Fuel to do now is set up on the point. From there on out, the Dynasty can't really get a pick anymore, while contesting means instant death thanks to Fuel's Widowmaker effect zoning the entire point. This second point is actually very closed and full of cover, which can make it hard for a Widowmaker, but we'll see that in a second.
Taimu on fire right now, popping that whole off.
Sadly, you can't benefit from the damage reduction that Take a Breather gives you while using Whole Hog. Roadhog using his ultimate here was the right call because he wanted to keep up the momentum, and Dynasty's Tracer took the opportunity to go in for a stick. Situations like these are going to happen more and more and are one of the main reasons why these established teams are going to create the highest quality matches. In most matches, one team just played well, the other team played poorly. But in these matches, one team plays well and the other team just plays better. Both players made the right play here, which means that the raw value of the play is taken into account. Even if every player always makes the right decision, one team is going to win because their decision just has more value behind it. And in this case, the Pulse Bomb just had more value than the Roadhog ultimate, which is why Taimu died. As players get closer and closer to their skill cap, the more this becomes evident. That's also why coaching in Overwatch right now is so interesting. Even the highest level players make mistakes, at least most of them, and those can be coached away. In more established titles, it becomes less about minimizing mistakes and more about the preparation and strategy, like how we can see with Dallas and Seoul, whereas most other OWL teams really benefit from just minimizing the individual mistakes players make before thinking too much about their compositions, although both are important, of course.
Needs a little bit more. Munchkin finds the kill anyway. XQC on the point with that Orisa. Effect in the back, getting the shots, takes down Jaehong. The control meter is...
I want to point out how incredibly safe Fuel's Mercy player Shipshagen is here. From the left, he is protected by the Orisa shield. From the right, he is protected by his entire team and the Orisa shield. And from the rear, he is protected by a Widowmaker watching his back. This is how you protect your support and most valuable pick on the team. But at this moment in time, it's not about the Dynasty retaking the point, it's more about how much time they can waste for the fuel. The Dynasty are basically stuck in a constant 6v1, player after player, and their respawn timers are going to increase more and more and more. That's why you shouldn't engage onto the second point of a 2CP map without getting a numbers advantage first. Engaging with a numbers advantage is the only way of actually maintaining it, and to deal with the defender's low spawn timers. So all in all, here's some advice that I would give to these teams. When planning out your strategies, think more about how easy it is for your Mercy to escape, and make sure to quickly adjust your positioning once you have scouted the enemy team comp. Most of the mistakes in this game were very minor, but also preventable. Both teams played outstandingly well, but with slight changes to their strategy, they could become even better, and going forward, I would say that it is going to be very hard to tell if the West or the East will dominate the Overwatch League.
And they do it.
Well, Taimu gets the kill onto Munchkin. He's got another whole hog. All right, they've got the May in there now for Seoul Dynasty, but he can push people back. They're so close, they've nearly got it. Fleta falls, and that will be at 4:30.